a listener production.
Hey, it's Antoinette Lattouf with the Weekend Briefing, where we tackle news and views a little differently because we park them on the bench and instead profile someone taking on today's biggest issues head on. And yes, those puns were absolutely intentional because my guest today is former rugby star turned independent Senator David Pocock. He famously refused to marry until same-sex couples had the same rights. He's been arrested for climate protests. And he embraces the weirdo label for believing sports and politics should mix. We'll also chat about why rugby must lead on climate action, given its deep ties to Pacific Island nations, communities that we know are hit hardest by climate change. Later, it's the Weekend List, your go-to guide for what to watch, see, eat, do and listen to. Producer extraordinaire Helen Smith will join me as we share what we're binging on and why you should too. But first, let's kick off my chat with David Pocock. And all right, okay, I'll probably stop the bad sports puns. Maybe. David, welcome to the Weekend Briefing.
Hi, Antoinette. Thanks for having me.
So you grew up on a massive farm in central Zimbabwe. As I understand, there was cattle and, you were busy with farm life. As a child, did you ever dream of rugby stardom, or were you too busy wrangling cattle and flowers?
I mean, yeah, I loved it. Very grateful for the childhood I had. I had a real fascination with nature and had lots of opportunities to explore that both on the farm and then, family holidays to national parks. But as a kid, I wanted to play rugby. It was something that I enjoyed doing, loved being out there with my mates and, was good at it and just thought this is something that I want to do at the highest level and was a huge Springbok supporter. Zimbabwe played the odd game, but not, you weren't watching them on television. So it was the Springboks that were my team.
An open side flanker is one of the toughest positions in rugby. What kind of mindset does it take to spend your career diving into breakdowns and getting roughed up?
I mean, the reason I loved it was you're always close to the action. But through school, I played all over the place. I played a lot in the back line, also played flanker, number 8. But ultimately, I think with my build, open side flanker was the best fit. And had someone like George Smith who just revolutionised what it was to be an open side flanker. So I really loved the physical side of things, really challenging myself. It takes its toll physically, that's for sure. It's one of those positions where you're in the firing line a lot, but a lot of fun.
And so at what point did you start thinking, I care about social issues, I care about the environment, I care about politics, I have this great career, but I want to start to dabble in things. I want to start dabbling into supporting causes. I want to study. At what point in your rugby career did you realise that there was more that you wanted to do?
Having grown up as a kid that idolised rugby players, had all the posters up on my wall from the sort of SA Rugby magazine. I knew what it was like to look up to rugby players and was very aware from my earliest days as a professional rugby player that wrongly or rightly, I did have some sort of platform. And I think over time started to think about, what do you actually do with that? We live in a world where we are facing some big issues, huge challenges. And for me, it was a couple of things that I thought were really important. And I wanted to use whatever platform I had to actually bring more people into this conversation that at times was, very polarized. And you'd probably say that a lot of people in the sports world weren't really engaging in it. It was very much left to sort of the political types, and I didn't think that was working for us. And so it really came down to, sort of two bigger issues. One was homophobia in sport, and marriage equality was something that people were starting to talk about. And my view was, how do you actually start in your own workplace? What does that look like for rugby to be a more inclusive environment? Clearly, the contact football coaches in Australia have a very, very long way to go if you look at statistics and then how many players are willing to be out while they play. And my view was it shouldn't be on those minority of players to have the bravery to come out, and should be on all of us to create an environment where they feel comfortable being who they are. And then the other big one, climate and nature, how we make decisions like we're here for a long time, how we actually start to look after this incredible planet that we call home, and really wanting to broaden the conversation around that and find ways to get involved. And so, spent a lot of time thinking about how to do that. And as my rugby career progressed, I guess I took steps to actually try and talk about that more, and at times, I guess, took risks to really try and see how I could do that better.
And I want to talk about those risks because I guess the very definition of allyship is using your privilege or your platform to help carry the load. So it shouldn't just be up to players in sport who are queer to advocate for marriage equality. I'm keen to hear about how your efforts to speak out were first received in the locker room, amongst coaches and amongst the rugby community. Like it would have raised some eyebrows, and I imagine gotten a little bit of pushback or a warning to be careful.
Yeah, it was interesting. I mean, I think around marriage equality, it was probably one of those issues that was far more polarized in the media and on social media than in relationships of people that you can actually have a conversation about why you think it might be important. In 2010, when my wife Emma and I decided not to sort of get officially sign the marriage documents when we got married, because we didn't think we wanted to be part of something that some of our friends couldn't. Should they wish to get married, they couldn't be part of it. At the time, I don't really remember much interest in that. It was just something that we did. As the marriage equality debate sort of heated up around the plebiscite, then I think there was a lot more interest in it. There was far more pushback around climate. It was really interesting seeing, and I think this has kind of changed in the last, 5-10 years, is people connecting climate change to the people and places we love. This is not some abstract thing out there. This is actually going to fundamentally change every part of how we live, including our sports. And rugby union is a sport where Pacific Island nations have punched so far above their weight. It's hard to overstate their impact. Look at it. Basically, any team in the world now has Pacific Islander players, and yet they are at the front line of the harms of climate, of changing climate. It's existential for them. And you'd think that as a rugby community, we would say, well, great, we've all got to be part of this. So it was interesting, had some really great conversations along the way. I was maybe often viewed as a bit of a weirdo. But I think one of the public things that athletes keep coming up against is, well, just stick to sport, mate. Don't bring politics into this. And politicians say it too, don't mix politics and sport.
I was going to ask that. And I mean, what obviously you don't agree about the mixture of politics and sport.
No, it's inherently political. You look at so much cultural change around the world, sport has been part of it. And I think sport is at its best when it's challenging society to actually be more inclusive, to think bigger than the individual. That's what sport's all about, is being part of something bigger than yourself. And I think there's a proud history of that happening. Politicians know the power of sport. They're forever traveling on the taxpayer dime to sporting events, having photo ops with our national teams, crowing on about the Matildas and other teams that we love watching, and then saying don't mix politics and sport when it's inconvenient from them, whether it's Scott Morrison on climate change or whatever it might be. I really just use that criticism to fuel me in wanting to perform better. And that if you're going to talk about things outside of sport, you've got to be actually doing the thing on the field and doing it well.
So what was more daunting for you as you pivoted? Was it more daunting playing against the All Blacks or trying to convince Australians to vote for an independent senator with a six-pack?
Politics is not something I ever thought I would be getting into in this way. I always thought you could probably change it more from the outside. And after being very frustrated with politics, a group in Canberra that was sort of set up to find an independent candidate essentially convinced me to put my hand up and run. And once I did, I was all in, and was very much had the mindset that was determined to try and build something that would mean that we could actually make history here in the ACT, despite a lot of people saying that it couldn't be done. Had no idea what I was getting myself into.
And let's stick with that for a moment, because particularly the ACT is a Labor stronghold. Can you explain the history-making element of having an independent senator elected for those who are outside of the ACT?
Sure. So the ACT only has 2 senators. The states have 12. The ACT's 2 senators are up every election. And every election for the last 50 years, it's been 1 Labor and 1 Liberal senator. And so for the first time, there was an independent, and it's now one Labor and 1 independent senator.
The media has compared your campaign strategy to a well-drilled rugby playbook. If your political career, now that you've had a few years in politics, if your political career was a rugby match, what position would you be playing now in this political climate?
Yeah, one of the things that's pleasantly surprised me is how much, I think sport generally, but I think maybe particularly professional sport, does prepare you for a lot of what happens in politics. Able to work under pressure, be part of a small team, set goals, take feedback on board. That's, as an independent, you're constantly seeking feedback from the community and trying to do things better. And so, yeah, I've really enjoyed sort of trying to build on those skills. The thing that's just so different is that in sport, it's such a finite game. Every weekend you have a game, it starts, it ends, what the result was, you can work on your performance. Politics is this infinite game that just has no end. And so making change looks very different. And so trying to work that out, how do we actually improve this system, which really isn't dealing with the big challenges we face. They're putting these little Band-Aids on gaping wounds. How do you actually change that?
In speaking to the finite rules and timing of sport, I guess what's different in politics is it's hard to determine what a clear win is. How do you reckon with somebody that is competitive and when a goal and a win is clearly defined, to politics where there is so much about compromise and staggered change? Have you had to redefine what it means to win?
Well, I've learned so much, and I'm learning more every day. I really had no idea what I was getting myself into. And some of the things people say is, well, independents can't really actually make a difference. Strongly disagree. And I've seen over the last 3 years how you can make a genuine, meaningful, measurable impact for the people that you represent. And I guess there's a few ways to think about the work that you do and those sorts of timelines. One, there's the government agenda. And in the Senate, when the opposition disagrees, they need the crossbench. And so there you're actually able to look at policy, consult with experts, consult with people in the ACT, and then work on amendments. And have secured a couple hundred of those to make bills better and improve things. Then I guess there's things that the major parties just aren't dealing with. As an independent, you're wanting to raise. So that's private senators' bills. I've got one that would legislate a duty of care to young people and future generations on climate. Seems pretty common sense and straightforward. Major parties hate it. And so you're actually able to drive, I think, longer term change in that way. And then it's just actually representing your community and being accountable to them, engaging in debates, really trying to change the way that we do politics. How do we rebuild some trust in politicians and our institutions when, turn on the TV. I think it's a pretty urgent, important project for us here in Australia to really undertake in earnest.
With the election, the federal election looming, what do you see as the biggest risks and opportunities for Australia?
I think it's, in terms of risks, you turn on the telly or scroll the news and it's all sort of international geopolitical issues, right? From Trump's America and this kind of new world order to what's happening, Israel, Gaza, in Sudan. There's a lot that people are concerned about. I think here in Australia, one of the huge challenges we're facing is growing intergenerational inequality. And a lot of that comes back to housing. Housing and cost of living are the biggest things I'm hearing from people, followed by health and then action on climate and nature. But I think housing is just so fundamental to our society and our future as a country. And I don't see anything from the major parties who actually wanted to tackle the root cause of this problem, where in 1999 we made changes that set housing up as an investment vehicle, not as something that's more of a human right that should be accessible and affordable to everyone in our community. And that has dire consequences. And we're starting to see that. And it's not going to get any better until we deal with that. So I think this election is a real choice of, yes, we're seeing incumbents across the world under pressure, but is the solution really to go back to the coalition that spent 10 years getting us into a lot of this mess? Or is there a third way, an alternative where you actually have independents and minor parties holding the balance of power and saying to the major parties, you've got to put Australians ahead of self-interest and vested interests?
For as long as I've been voting, though, cost of living and housing have always been among the top two, or at least the top three concerns amongst voters. What does it say that 20 years later, they're still the top issues and that it's getting worse? Like, what does it either say about voters' appetite for change or our largely two-party system?
I think it speaks to the short-sightedness of our politics. I think John Howard's quip that he's never met a homeowner complain about their property value going up, and you have 60% of Australians who own a home or have a mortgage, and so we have this sort of thinking amongst politicians that if my whole goal is just to win the next election, then you don't touch that. And we just leave that as is. We try and sell some Band-Aid solutions rather than going to the root cause of having a housing system that is becoming so unaffordable, that is leading to all sorts of other issues around cost of living and people on good salaries not being able to, make do and raise a family. And that obviously has, all the commentators talk about just how big an issue is that, but I just haven't seen the political leadership and courage to have that conversation and say, listen, we have this system that, yes, is good for some, but is not good for us as a country. And my sense is that one of the things that has changed is that even people who've done very well out of property are now saying, well, gee, what does this mean for my kids or my grandkids? Like, this is not a good situation that we've got ourselves into. You don't end up in a housing crisis overnight. This is decades of policy from both major parties, and it's time that we actually have some sensible ways forward that change things. My hope is that independents can do that, and rather than saying, well, let's just scrap everything when it comes to capital gains tax and negative gearing, I think there's ways to actually turn the ship around that would get the vast majority of Australians on board. And myself and Jackie Lambie have done a lot of work with the Parliamentary Budget Office on some sensible proposals to do that.
And there is, and you mentioned it, fear-mongering. There's often fear-mongering about minority governments being, chaotic or ineffective or slow. What is your response to that, particularly given that you're part of the Senate, which plays, a micro role as a daily minority government?
Well, it's not like majority governments have been that stable over the last, 15 years or so in Australia. What I've seen in the Senate is every day's minority government. The Senate hasn't been held by a major party since John Howard's last term, which turned out to be a bit of a disaster for him. And what I've seen is that when the crossbench holds the balance of power, we get better outcomes. We get better thought through legislation, because as a independent, I'm accountable to my community. So I have to actually get out there and consult with experts, consult with people in the ACT, and land on a place where, hand on heart, I can vote on their behalf on legislation. And I think we get better legislation that reflects what more Australians want. And I think sort of more robust legislation where we don't see this kind of seesawing where And it's pretty ridiculous, the number of things that Labor undid that the coalition had done, or things that the coalition had done that were actually good ideas, and then they rebrand them, rename them, so that they're now Labor things. Like, surely we can do better than that. And I think with a strong crossbench, we can.
There has been a rise in, Trumpian-style politics globally, and you do see moments, or more than a moment, where Dutton seems to be reading from that same kind of populist playbook. Are you worried about those approaches and policies creeping into Australia?
Well, we've clearly seen some of them. The attack on the public service, I think, is one, and that's not new in Australian politics. We saw the previous successive coalition governments decrease the public service and essentially just outsource those jobs. And so we've got, on one hand, Peter Dutton saying he's going to cut 36,000 public servants. On the other hand, we know that in Scott Morrison's last year as Prime Minister, there were 50,000 external contractors. Between them and consultants, the bill for that was $20 billion in his last year. So it's not a cost-saving exercise, it's a culture war. And I think that is a lot of the Trumpian politics that we see. I don't think a lot of it will stick as it does in the US. I think a range of different reasons here, one being compulsory voting, where everyone gets in there and places their vote. I think in the US, a lot of people who are disillusioned with both major parties simply don't turn up. One of the things I am most worried about with our politics at the moment is that in the face of more competition from minor parties and independents, the major parties in the last sitting week stitched up a deal to essentially entrench the duopoly, to make it harder in not this election but the next election for anyone to challenge them. Very much taking us in the direction of the US, where you only have two parties. You don't have a third choice.
And that's via the donation caps?
Yeah, so the Labor introduced two bills, one to do with donation and expenditure reform, one was truth and political advertising. They introduced both bills and just totally parked truth and political advertising. That's not something that they actually want. Both parties want to be able to just lie in election ads and not hold themselves to a higher standard. But when it comes to stitching up how you receive money, how you can spend it, they've just totally stacked it in favour of incumbents and major parties. Really worrying for our democracy. And so I think one of the reasons to vote independent minor party in this election is to send a message that Australians want competition. Like, we want our elections to be a contest of ideas, not just a decision of do you vote for the blue team or the red team.
One of the other things that has historically been, I guess, linked to the right, but that's changing a bit, is the crackdown on protesting and the freedom to assemble. We're seeing that with the Labor government as well. As someone who has been previously arrested, I mean, this is before your political career, but arrested for protesting for climate change, how concerned are you with just how difficult it is to protest without it being criminalised, or at the very least demonised in the media and by the political class?
Yeah, it's incredibly concerning to see Labor and Liberal governments across the country cracking down on the freedom to protest. We've seen 49 different laws against protesters passed at a state and territory level. It's so fundamental to the freedoms we enjoy in our democracy. And a lot of this has been driven at the behest of the fossil fuel industry that is clearly losing social license. I was arrested in 2014, sitting alongside Rick Laird, fifth generation farmer. The forest we were in was named after his family. And a coal mine was approved in the middle of Laird State Forest, the largest intact box gum woodland left in New South Wales, essentially in the world. And this is a critically endangered ecosystem. And yet, we've allowed Whitehaven to get in there. And found out last year that they haven't even complied with all of their conditions around offsets and all the rest. It's just a total free-for-all for fossil fuel companies. And the thing that's become so clear over the last few years in the Senate is the state capture of fossil fuel companies of the major parties. There's been legislation that's come through the Senate backed by the major parties where basically the entire crossbench has voted against it, that is just designed for a company like Santos to be able to expand. And that's not in the best interests of Australians. So it's very concerning. I think the right to protest is something that we should protect. Peaceful protest has been part of so many of the things we now just take for granted, from women voting to civil rights to a whole bunch of environmental things that we can just now not even fathom used to happen.
A few times throughout this chat, you've said, I didn't really know what I was getting into, but now you're well and truly into it. Are there moments as an independent senator where you really feel up against it, where you feel that, the structural change or the power players or the fact that legislation can be introduced which will essentially make anything outside of the two-party system very difficult to fundraise? Like, are there moments when you go, oh, God, had big ambitions, or there are things I wanted to do, but it's feeling really hard?
Yeah, lots of times like that. But I mean, that's part of being human, I think. That's the gift of being alive is sort of working out how do I make decisions that lead me into a bigger life where I'm facing big challenges. But the thing that is just so invigorating as an independent is meeting so many people who are saying, yeah, let's do things better. We may not have the support of the major parties in the parliament, but Australians back that idea, getting more for our gas exports. It's utter madness that we give away half of our offshore gas without any royalty. And these same companies basically pay no tax. I guarantee you 80+% of Australians will say, that's our gas. Once it's gone, it's gone. The major parties may not think that, and they're still happy to take the cash from these gas companies. But many times you're sort of pushing on behalf of people, and often the majority of people, which I guess kind of shows how much we need to potentially change the way we do politics in Australia and the opportunity for minor parties independence. But yeah, it's an uphill battle. But I've seen one of the big takeaways is that change is not linear. Like there's all these tipping points that you just can't anticipate. And so I often encourage people, just keep pushing hard, really have a good strategy, find ways to continue to make this issue matter. And yeah, at some point, it's all of a sudden possible in the parliament.
So while being an independent obviously gives you a great deal of autonomy and freedom, I'd imagine it would also be isolating at times. Like, do you have a group of other independent senator mates that you can call up and just be like, fuck, that MP's annoying, and, or just to have a bit of a posse to have that community?
One of the things I've loved about being an independent is being able to work across the parliament on various issues. You're obviously working with the government on a lot of the government legislation. You're working on inquiries with the opposition. You're working on the crossbench a lot on issues that neither of the major parties want to touch. And, a lot of what happens in Parliament is not question time. Question time is an absolute disgrace. And, the major party will say, oh, it's theatre and, it's an important part of our democracy. I think politicians let themselves down in question time, because that's really what a lot of Australians see and think Parliament is like. There's actually so much good faith work that happens in the background. And so, for votes, sometimes you're often sitting opposite the major parties, but you're often sitting with the crossbench. And, once I land on a position that I think reflects what people in the ACT want, like, I'm very happy to cop any heckles or abuse in the chamber for that. So I don't think it's that isolating. I've got a great little team that I love working with.
Shifting gears a little bit, but no doubt still very intense, you recently became a father. Congratulations.
Thank you.
How's that transition been for you?
It's been It's been a lot of fun. I feel like, people don't talk about how much fun it can be. But, obviously a lot. He was born just before the last sitting weeks of last year. So there was a pretty big juggling act. And obviously, as a father, I'm not as needed as my wife, Emma. So she's carried a lot of it. But, you got to find ways to do things smarter and more efficient and juggle everything. But so far so good. We'll see how we go.
So what's next for you? Obviously, you're going to see out your term, but you're only 36 and you've already had one massive career pivot. Do you see yourself staying in politics for the time being?
Yeah, I've put my hand up to run again. I feel like there's so much more to do in politics. We've got to start making decisions for the longer term. We've got to start actually making decisions like we're here for a long time. Like we want to pass on this incredible place for our kids, for future generations. And one of the things that has really struck me when you talk to Australians is how much they love this place. And we know that short-term decision-making is killing us. Like it is catching up with us so quickly. And so I'm really keen to try and, see what Canberrans think, try and get re-elected and keep pushing on all these issues that really do matter to people.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thanks, Antoinette. Great to chat.
That's Independent Senator David Pocock. It's that time of the week you're always waiting for. It's Weekend List. Helen Smith joins me and we help you decipher what you should be watching next, what you should be listening to next. It does feel like we have this endless stream of content options and it's really hard to know where to start. We're here to help you. You can thank us later. Helen Smith, what do you have?
My first recommendation is Pistachio Papi spread. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of like, Nutella Biscoff, but it's pistachio.
Okay.
Yochi, that frozen yogurt place, have it at the moment.
Okay.
And it's so delicious. And I'm just obsessed. Biscoff is out. Pistachio Papi, whatever this name is.
Can you get it in a jar?
Yeah, it's just like in a jar. And it is a little bit expensive. It's like $19.
Ooh.
I know. But then when you think about how much pistachios are, it kind of makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
Because it's real. It's like proper pistachio spread.
Okay.
It's delicious. You can add it to baking, pancakes, even like on yogurt, which is good. Chocolate, anything chocolate. It's so yummy. And
is it really sugary like a Nutella? Because that's like 70% just sugar.
It's sweet. It's sweet, but not as sweet as like Nutella or Biscoff. But it still really tastes like pistachio. But I'm just obsessed because I feel like we've always had all these spreads, but pistachios have just been pushed to the side. They're always just like whole pistachios or crunched up like proper pistachios, which I also love.
Yeah.
But this spread is just yummy. It's a little bit bougie. It's not something you can buy like every week.
No, but if you buy one Yochi, the way I pay $18, the way I stack it up like a scab.
Jeez.
Like I go around.
Oh my God.
I know. Like my partner looks at me and he's like, that's $18.
That's a lot.
And I was like, I just need a little bit more. And I just put
my God.
So I mean, if you think that's a bit bougie like I can spend that in one Yochi trip.
Okay.
I mean,
I take it back. Not bougie for Antoinette, no Yochi order. But yeah, Pistachio Papi spread. I think you can order it online. You can get it from specialty stores. Really yummy. It's an Aussie brand too. So yeah, I love it.
I love that. Okay, I don't know if you have watched White Lotus, season 1 and 2. Have you?
Have never watched it. I know it's rare.
It is rare. So season 3 is now out and it is on Binge. It's pretty much the only thing I watch on Binge. I stop and I start my subscription just to watch White Lotus. And season 3 is out. And so for those who haven't watched it, I would say that you're in the minority. Like, I don't mean to out you, Helen, but
I know.
It's a bit of a fan fave.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a fan fave. But if you haven't watched it and you're wondering what she's talking about, it is each season is set on an amazing resort at an amazing location with very wealthy people. And they're all quite separate, as in they're in separate countries, predominantly separate casts. And the new cast of wealthy, miserable guests are at a Thai resort. It's this really visually stunning, sumptuous feast. It's gotten 92% on Rotten Tomatoes, but it's a really slow start. In some reviews I've read going, it's a sizzling simmer. But I'm like, dude, turn up the heat. I'm getting a little bit bored. But there are some really standout performances. And I think what I really love about it, and I think why people get behind it, is because we love to hate rich people.
Oh, yeah.
Like rich and entitled people. And so there's quite a bit of satire on wellness influences, digital detoxing, and the Western fetishization of like Buddhism and Eastern cultures, and they're turning it into luxury tourism. There is a standout performance for me, and it's a prescription pill addicted mother of 3 from America's South.
Even I've heard about,
I love her. She's just the best. And so it's about episode 5 in, because they drop weekly. It hasn't gotten to the big drama, because there's a big drama and then there's a whodunit type thing. That hasn't dropped. For now, I'm enjoying the Thai music, the Thai location, and I'm giving it probably a bit more space and rope than I ordinarily would, because season 1 and 2 were so great.
Yeah.
So White Lotus season 3, stick with it, I would say, but I can't quite endorse it as amazing, and I love it. But I'm committed to seeing it through.
Okay. I have been told many times I need to watch it. So look, I watched season 1. I've been told I could skip season 2.
No.
Oh, don't skip season 2?
No, don't skip
All right,
season 2.
I won't skip any. I'll
there
go
is
1,
a tiny bit of continuity between, and I'm not going to ruin it for you, but there's a tiny bit of continuity in between.
All right.
And so they do kind of work as standalones, but I would suggest you watch all 3.
Okay, I will definitely do that. Now, my next recommendation is a bit random. I've talked about DJ X on Spotify before. Yeah. This time I'm recommending one of the options. It's called Discover Weekly. So it kind of gives you a bunch of new songs you haven't heard before, or you might have heard maybe once or twice.
Yeah.
And it curates a playlist of Discover Weekly, new songs that you might like. And I really like it because every week you get a new playlist. And I found some really good hits on there that I've saved the entire playlist. It's that good. Some weeks not great, but if you're looking for new music and new music that the algorithm will kind of know you already be
it's
into.
Like it's a music echo chamber, which I completely subscribe to.
I love that stuff because I'm like, you know my style. I'm not going to go out like rogue. And it's hard to scour new songs and find new artists. So Discover Weekly, I think it's working for me. Some weeks, crap.
Yeah,
some weeks,
okay.
Wow.
You've got to give
but
it.
If you are looking for new music, and it also gives you music from like everywhere. A lot of the artists I've been getting lately are Aussie, which I love. And you can also just go in and find Aussie music, like top Aussie music, which I think is great to do with Spotify. But yeah, that's my recommendation. A little short, quick one if you're looking for new music or a new jam.
Yeah, I do like that. I found myself on a similar feature on Apple, and I was listening to all this music, and I was like, "Oh, what's this? This is so good! What a great playlist!" And it was like Antoinette Station, and I was like, "It's me!"
And it's
I did
named
this, guys.
after you.
I did this.
Oh my God, I want that.
And so what it essentially did was curate a whole bunch of songs based on either the artist I like or the genre, and so I really enjoyed it. And I complimented myself because I was like, "Oh well, this is essentially me doing this.
This is Antoinette.
Yeah.
I love that."
Okay, so my recommendation is something you can listen to. It is a podcast, and it is hosted by a former briefing friend and a good friend of mine, Jan Fran. It's part of the Unravel series on ABC. And so what they do is they bring in guest hosts, and in this case, it's six episode historical investigation. So you have to search Unravel, but this part of it is Conspiracy War on the Waterfront, and it focuses on the 1998 waterfront dispute. And I don't know if you're aware of it, but it was a high-stakes battle between Wharfies, the Maritime Union of Australia members, and the Howard government, and an organisation called Patrick Corporation. So this was a huge industrial relations, an industrial dispute. And because it is investigative, it speaks to some of the key players at the time and reveals stuff we've never known before. So in a nutshell, if you haven't heard of Waterfront, the Patrick Corporation, which was a private entity, sacked its entire workforce overnight, locked them out. So when they came to work the next day, there were balaclava-clad security guards with attack dogs patrolling the wharves, not letting the wharfies come back to work. So huge drama. There were leaks, backroom deals, and the Australian government at the time was involved. So it was this huge standoff between a Conservative government that wanted to de-unionise workplaces and a very left union workforce. Anyway, so much drama.
That sounds so interesting.
So much drama, but in Jan's very
Love Jan.
Jan style, she'll come across a historical document and go, well, that's not exactly true. But did they? You know, and so she retells that story and unravels, hence the name, unravels new information. It is available via the ABC Listen app. They only drop an episode every week, so there's currently 3 out of the 6 out now. That is Unravel on ABC.
Very interesting, and love Jan Fran. Woo!
But that is it for this week. Thanks so much for being with us. It's always a pleasure. If you want more of the Weekend Briefing, find us on the Listener app. If you don't have the Listener app, what are you waiting for? Download it, and while you're there, give us a review. Tell us what you think about this chat with David Pocock. Take a moment also just to quickly share this episode with a mate who you think might enjoy it. We'll be back on Monday morning where the team will have the latest headlines straight to your headphones, as well as an interesting deep dive. Stay safe, everyone, and I'll catch you next week.
Listener.